If you need help with the technical aspect of it, contact Marcus Mountjoy, or the membership team, who will very gladly help you. No Kings, the next No Kings protest is March 28th. Speaking of volunteers, the League will have a table at the No Kings event on March 28th at Mill Creek Park. We will be registering voters and providing information about upcoming events like forums, online literacy, Vote 411, and important election dates and information. If the volunteer slots are filled, still feel free to stop by our tent to say hi. You can volunteer for a work party on Wednesday, March 18th, by going to the website or reviewing the volunteer newsletter. And so that will be a work party specific to No Kings to maybe make buttons and other needs that we'll need for that table. The SAVE Act. Please continue to call your senators regarding the different versions of the SAVE Act, or as LWV US calls them, the SAVE Act suite of bills. It's not just one. The newest version is still in the Senate. The bill would require voters to present documentary proof of citizenship to register and or vote. So remember that it's already illegal for non-citizens to register and vote in federal or state elections. So saying that that provision is needed is not. Requiring documentary proof of American citizenship to register to vote in federal elections is unnecessary and seeks to divide us. It simply creates another barrier to voting. So please use your voice, call your senators, and let them know, because it really does make a difference. They have to log their calls, and they will see those numbers. Okay, great. So feel free to contact and ask committee chairs how you can help. Every committee has a job out there for someone to do, whether it be to make buttons, staple flyers, help with voter registration, technical computer help is always needed by several committees to send out mailings, put together the Vote 411 information. If you have any interest in social media, please let us all know. Just to let you know some of the stuff that committees have been doing. Forums has a list of upcoming forums. Voter registration has many events coming up. Voter education continues to present online media training and will soon start ballot measure presentations. Greg and Kelly put together a presentation for Northeast High School, teaching 8 classes over a 2-day period. That's amazing. Yeah, it's fantastic. Kelly and Anitra appeared on KKFI to provide information about voting at forums. The Vote 411 team has already cycled through several election dates with information for voters about what is on their ballot. The website team has been working on updating and refreshing the website. And our social media team has been busy designing new flyers and buttons and getting information on our social media platforms about new events and league announcements. Thus endeth the announcements. And we move on. We're so happy to have Lindsey Cormack with us today. Very, very fortunate. Dr. Lindsey Cormack is an associate professor of political science and director of the Diplomacy Lab at Stevens Institute of Technology. She has authored a book, actually a couple of books, and her latest is How to Raise a Citizen and Why It's Up to You to Do It. It explains how and why parents must help their children to learn about politics and government. and we're very lucky that she has family in the Kansas City area, some of whom are here today. Thank you, welcome. Glad you could be here. And we're so glad that you could be here in person as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Cormack.
Hooray, thank you. Thank you all so much for having me. I gotta tell you, talking with leagues are some of my favorite audiences because you all understand that this is up to us to do. And so the main argument you're gonna get, and what I hope that you take away from this talk, is some of the data that underlies this argument. I also want to thank my family for being here because they totally surprised me. And it's really nice to expose, I'll call you my nephew, but my second cousin Cruz, to what's happening in this community to make sure that when we get older, we have the powers to pull levers in government so we can make things better for ourselves. Before I get started with the actual talk, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am. And I do that because I know that most of you have never met me. And I start with this picture, which is me in 2022. I was in New York City, going around with 2 camping chairs, 1 camping table. Oh, that's fine, yeah. Shan, you wanna? Yeah, let's make it dramatic. I like that. Okay. In 2022, I had a year-long sabbatical from work. And so I went around New York City on the outsides of Central Park with a camping chair and a camping table and a sandwich sign that said, "Will you chat with me about politics for 3 minutes?" And then I had a 3-minute SAM timer. And the reason that I did this is because as an academic political scientist, most of the time I understand politics by studying numbers or text as data, but I don't get that much one-on-one time with people other than in the classroom. I also put this up first to let you know any questions or thoughts that you have when we get to our Q&A, I guarantee you it won't be the weirdest thing I've ever heard because New York City in that year offered me plenty to think about. I'm a political scientist at Stevens Institute of Technology, which is primarily an engineering-serving institution in Hoboken, New Jersey. And I wouldn't have written this book had I not been there. My students at this engineering school are so smart. They're good at doing school. They're great at taking tests. They go on to brilliant careers. But oftentimes, when I get them in Intro to American Government, they don't know the very basics. And it's not their fault. They didn't raise themselves, and oftentimes they're coming from magnet schools that have focused on science, technology, engineering, and math, at the expense of things like history, art, civics, government, politics. And so I had 6 of them work with me as research assistants to do the research that I'm going to show you. And we also interviewed teachers in 47 out of the 50 states to sort of make sure that what we were seeing in the data was buttressed by what teachers were experiencing in the classroom. The very first contribution that I had to academic political science is DC Inbox. And this is a website that I'd encourage you to go to when you get home. I'll show you a little bit about what you can see there. But what it is every member of Congress gets a budget to send emails to us in their official capacity. So this isn't vote for me, this isn't give me money. This is here's what I'm doing on your behalf. Here's the bills I'm introducing, here's the committee hearings I'm holding, here's why I voted this way or that way. And one of the very first emails that came in was from Emanuel Cleaver, which is someone I imagine some of you have some passing familiarity with. So this was back in 2009 when the database got started, and the reason that I built DC Inbox is because I thought these are taxpayer-funded communications in the official .gov capacity. That's something that we should have as our history. That should be an archive that we should have access to. But in 2009, when I talked to the Library of Congress, they were like, yes, we have an archive. We've printed them off. They're in this sub-basement. If you want to scan those emails back in, you can make a database. And I was baffled. But I wasn't deterred. I said, okay, I'll go ahead and make the online infrastructure for this. So from 2009 until today, I have maintained this. The New York Times uses it. Plenty of other journalists and researchers use it because you can really learn a lot about what our members of Congress are doing. So this is in 2009 when Emanuel Cleaver is talking about healthcare. And this is from just the other day when Emanuel Cleaver is talking about healthcare because for the last 16 years, this has been an ongoing debate in Congress. Something else you can do at dcinbox.com is you can put in certain words and see if Democrats or Republicans have been talking about it more or less. So what's up here is the SAVE Act, and I've only had it from Jan 2025 till today, or till Jan 2026. And what you can see is, at least in congressional messaging, Republicans have been doing a lot more to message on why the SAVE Act is necessary than Democrats have done on the work to act against it. And the reason that I put it up with leagues is because I know the League doesn't take positions on every piece of legislation, but on the SAVE Act, the League has. I'm a member in New York City. And so when I think about sort of the overall communication environment on this, I know that within Congress, there's far more coming from the right and saying we need to pass it than the left and saying that there's harms in passing it. So I think the work that we do outside of those formal halls of power is really important, especially if we know the background of this. You can also do things like look up a word and see which delegation is talking about it the most per member of Congress. And I always put this slide in. I can either do it with the word beef or with the word Lord, because both of those are centered in Kansas. Now, in Missouri, we all know where Kansas is, but most of my stuff is done on the East Coast, and I like this one because it lets everyone know this is the state that I spent 18 years of my life in growing up, and so they can have a sense that, oh yeah, that is pretty far away from where we were on the coasts. The very first book that I wrote is called Congress and U.S. Veterans, From the GI Bill to the VA Crisis. And I liked doing this book very much, but it's one that someone else asked me to write. They said, Lindsey, using DC Inbox, can you tell us what the parties are saying about veterans? And I'll give you the short version, which is 75% of all communications that come about veterans in Congress come from the Republican Party. So when you ask people which party is working more for veterans, they'll most often tell you it's Republicans. However, if you look at legislation, more legislation is introduced and successfully passed by Democrats in Congress. So this is a book that sort of goes through that puzzle and how we can know it now that we have all the comms data. When I'm not doing academic political science and when I'm not writing, I'm working on my community board, which is the most local form of government in New York City. It's an appointed position. There's 50 of us. And what I do for my community board is I chair our street life committee, which is liquor licenses, cannabis licenses, sidewalk cafes, and roadway cafes. And what that looks like realistically is me going around New York City and finding places that are not giving us the 8 feet of clearance that we're meant to have to walk on the pedestrian sidewalk. I'm obviously not 8 feet tall, but my 13-year-old daughter and I will go around, find the businesses. I'll talk to a manager and be like, hi, the regulations say we have 8 feet of pedestrian clearance so that you can either have 2 wheelchairs or 2 mobility devices, 2 strollers, whatever it is. And they'll look at me and be like, I don't have to listen to you, lady. And so then I'll go lay down, we send it to the Department of Transportation, and the next day they get fixed. And so it's not like how I want it to work. I wish the conversation would work, but I have found that this is a far more effective way to get our businesses to give us the sidewalks back. And it's not that I want businesses to fail. I really like our sidewalk dining, but I want us to share the space in a way that prioritizes pedestrians over private industry making money on our sidewalks. The book that I'm here to talk to you about today is How to Raise a Citizen and Why It's Up to You to Do It. I was in Missouri, at the University of Missouri 2 days ago, and someone told me that he didn't like the book because he was like, I don't like that you're telling me how to raise my citizen. And I was like, have you read it yet? And he said, no. And I got a text from him this morning that said, I've done a classic judging by a book by its cover. Your introduction says, you're not telling me how to do it. You're saying, here's the different ways that you could do it based on your orientation to politics, which is true. There's not one way to raise a citizen, but there are some things that we need to know. And it's true that it is up to us to do it because getting it all done in the schools is not possible for reasons that I'll go over in just a minute. For the last year and a half, I've been on tour with this book. This is me on C-SPAN TV in a bookstore in Long Island, New York, doing an event with Braver Angels, which some of you might be familiar with, which is sort of this bridge building. Blues and reds need to have discussions in order to get across differences. And then last year, Governor Hochul of New York had me up. She honors someone in every assembly district for work that they're doing in the civic space. And she signed this book saying it was the most important work as we're moving forward into 2026. But before you get afraid, oh, thanks. I was really happy. But before you're afraid of like, oh no, there's this like lady from New York City with a New York governor. What sort of like liberal shenanigans is this going to be? Please know that former President Bush and First Lady Laura Bush also sent me letters to congratulate me on this work. And I really see it as pre-partisan, or bipartisan, or transpartisan, because really there's a difference between raising a citizen and raising a partisan. So this is the first piece of data, which you don't need to read these small little letters here. But when we think about what a child learns about civics or politics or government in the United States, there is not one answer. There is at a minimum 50 answers, because all the states get to decide what they're going to teach, how many minutes they're going to have in the classroom. Is it a semester? Is it a year? Do they have to pass a citizen test or not? And all those states are decided at the state, or the decisions are made at the state level, and then it's different if you're in public school or private school or independent school or home school. So there's really not one answer to what our kids are learning. But I will tell you the modal form of delivery. Throughout most of the United States, the way that most of our children experience civics education is in 7th or 8th grade, they'll get their first social studies class. Sometimes this will be world history, sometimes it'll be American history, but usually at that point, we introduce them to Columbus sails the ocean blue, we have some settlers, there's some founders, there's a little westward expansion, the end. And they learn it as sort of a history lesson, not something that these see themselves as a part of. Then, in most of the country, we wait until 11th or 12th grade, and we dip in again with a Congress or a government class. In some states, it's a semester, in some states, it's a year. But unlike every other subject where we scaffold from K through 12, for most of our students, they're going to get one look in 7th or 8th grade and then another look in 11th and 12th grade. And so it's just too little and too late to make sure that our kids really understand everything. And I don't know what you were like in your second semester of your senior year of high school, but I do remember what I was like. And it wasn't, please teach me everything I need to know about government so that I can interact with the world. It's not when we're learning that. High school students are thinking about what's college, what's my job, what's my relationship. And so to say that we need to download all these important things to them at that moment, it doesn't work. When we look at the data on this, what I'm showing you here is the Nation's Report Card assessment of 8th graders in civics. So the Nation's Report Card is administered every 4 years on the civics question. It's administered every 2 years on math, science, reading, English. But the civics one is in the field right now. And what you're seeing at the top, that green bar, is advanced achievement. If we had advanced achievement, that's where we'd expect our scores to be. Yellow is proficient, red is basic, and blue is where we are at, which is from 1998 to 2002, our 8th graders are not any better off in terms of their understanding of civics. Now, you could conceivably have a parent who was in 8th grade in 1998, who has a child in school in 2022, who's not learning more. If you were to sum this all up, only about 22% of our 8th graders are considered proficient in civics. When we look at the high school level, one way that we can assess this is AP US Government. And you know, AP US Government is not a required course, it's an opt-in course. Only 2% of American students ever decide to take AP US Government. They do it because either they're interested or they do it because they think it's an easy A. But what I'm showing you here is the 2019 scores of how students were doing on average. That black bar is AP US Government and History. AP US Government and History is typically one of the lowest scoring assessments of all of the ones that are offered, despite the fact that nearly every student who sits for this is going to be a US citizen for the rest of their lives. And as the AP score works, it's from a scale of 1 to 5, and if you don't get a 3 or above, you're not eligible for college credit. So on average, the majority of students who sit for this exam don't earn college credit. In 2023, when you're looking at all the different assessments, it was the 37 out of 38 possible ones administered that year in terms of rates of people who got a 3 or above. So we know that in middle school, they don't have the basics. We know that in high school, in our assessment, they aren't showing the basics as well. However, when you get to 2024, which is after the book was out, these new scores came in, there was this big bump up. Does anyone have any guess what happened in 2024 that these scores got way better?
Your book went on the market, is that the right?
Oh God, I'd love it, right? It was like, oh, this book came out, everyone learned it, it was fine. No. The election, a lot of people guessed that. They're like, the election, everyone's paying attention. No. What happened was the test assessment was recalibrated because AP was getting feedback from parents and schools that they're unhappy that they're paying for this class, they're paying for this assessment, and they're not earning college credit. So history and government were recalibrated so that more students would get shifted up to that 3 and above, which I think actually puts us in a worse position because we've grade inflated our way into a place where students who get that 3 and above then don't have to take a college class on it, which means they might not have to interact with this ever again. So instead of taking this as like a marker of hope, I take it as a marker of like this problem is going to be a little bit harder to see. When we're thinking about out of the classroom, registering to vote, what I'm showing you here is all the US states and the share of 18 to 24-year-olds who are registered to vote in that state. I've put Missouri in purple and it's about the middle. So you don't have to feel as bad as how I feel. In New York, we're the 4th lowest. So this is the share of eligible citizen 18 to 24-year-olds who are registered to vote. In every state, if you look at people who are 65 and up, it's a good chunk higher than those who are 18 to 24. And this is despite the fact that in many states, you can pre-register at 16. You can't actually participate until you're 18, or in a primary where the actual general election is going to be when you're 18. But we have a lot of work to do around the United States. What I'm showing you here is the share of people who turned out to vote by age from 18 to 85 up. So it's pretty much this slope upwards. And when I'm teaching college students, they'll sometimes get really frustrated with me and they'll be like, I hate how everyone in politics is so old. And I'll say like, ooh, well, we are a representative democracy. Why don't you go see who's trying to get represented in this system? And they'll go find census data or they'll find something else and they'll come back to me with a graph like this and be like, oh, okay. When you look at the voting for presidential elections, it's a steep slope, but when you look at midterm elections, like what we have right now, it's even steeper. So in our last midterm election, fewer than a quarter of 18 and 19-year-olds who are registered to vote turned out to vote. And oftentimes, it's not necessarily what I would say is their fault. It's a really hard environment in the sense that when there's a presidential election, everyone's focusing on it. When there's a midterm election, despite the fact that the entire House could turn over and a third of the Senate can turn over, the media just doesn't focus on it as much. It's also hard in a lot of places because those elections aren't that competitive. For instance, in New York City, in the district that I'm in, I'm represented by Jerry Nadler. Prior to this year, I was represented by Carolyn Maloney, and then in redistricting, we had one district and he ended up beating her. But that means for all the people in my district, for more than 30 years, the same person has been in that seat and it has not been competitive. As soon as they get out of a Democratic primary, they are going to win that election in November. So this is the first time in 30 years that many of the people in my district are having to have a competitive primary to figure this out. Our young people are under-practiced, media doesn't focus on it, and oftentimes this young class is starting college. And they'll say things like, you know, I'm going to stay registered in Pennsylvania because that's a swing state. And I'll say, okay, except for, I think it's unlikely that on a Tuesday in the middle of a semester where you just got here that you're going to get yourself back to Pennsylvania to vote. And they'll say, okay, I'll vote by mail or absentee. And I'll be like, great, do you know where a post office is? Have you bought a stamp? And most of the young people have never done this. And so there's just hurdles that make it hard to do this, which is why I encourage every college student to register where they live. And I encourage their parents to encourage them to do that as well. Because the notion that you might be more pivotal back in your home state is only true in a presidential election. And the politics of where your body is at is a politics that you should really try to influence. So there's a few ways that we got to this civic deficit. It wasn't overnight. But one thing is, there's an intricate design of American politics. It's not easy. It's not something that you can expect someone to get in a semester in middle school and a year in high school and figure it all out. Though there are similarities in local, state, and federal levels, there are differences. When I ask my college students, like, do you know what the word gubernatorial means? Most of them don't. And that's because most of them have never interacted with what a governor's role is in their state government in the actual criteria for what it is to pass government in their school curriculum. It's also the case that when we were doing this work, we found that there's two sorts of community or family approaches that make it really hard for young people to get this. This first approach is far more prevalent in the Midwest and the South, which is thinking that politics is off limits, thinking that it's taboo, that it sits in this bucket of like, we don't talk about sex or drugs or how much money someone makes or religion, we don't talk about politics. When we don't do that in front of our children or with our children, they don't have the capacity to build the muscles to do this once they turn 18 themselves. On the other side, though, more on the coasts, we found that there's this sort of overwhelming feeling that politics is something to be hated. So when our kids hear, like, everyone in it is an egomaniac, they're in it for themselves, the system is rigged, you shouldn't participate anyhow, it's not surprising that they don't want to go learn more, because who wants to go hang out with a bunch of egomaniacs in a rigged system? And so that's painful for kids to hear as well. And even in homes that aren't doing, not talking, or hating politics, children's media, literature, and entertainment is rife with anti-government, anti-politician sentiment. There's two sorts of archetypes in most kids' literature. One is like in Paw Patrol, where you have Mayor Humdinger, and it's like the bumbling doofus mayor. Usually a mayor is who they get in their sort of literature or in their sort of visual entertainment. The other archetype is like the mayor in The Simpsons, which is like a sleazy character who's out to do harm to the city that he's meant to protect. So even if our houses aren't talking about these things, they are getting anti-government messages from a very young age. And then I realized that in any League of Women Voters group, there's going to be educators. And so I'm going to say these next pieces lightly, but it's true that schools can't do this. They can't do it on their own. If I had a magic wand, I would K through 12, say we're doing civics in every piece. If I had a magic wand, I would support our social studies teachers. And this book is not anti-social studies teachers. It is to say that getting it all done in schools right now is an impossibility, which is why I think we have to take it to our homes and our communities. One of the reasons it's hard to get this done in schools is because legislatures across the country have increasingly made teachers wary about what they can and can't say. Can they talk about this topic? Can they do it in this way? Can they assign this reading? Can they engage in this material? And in some places it's worse than in others. So in Texas in 2023, they passed a law that said experiential civics or action civics, which people who are in education would tell you is the best way to learn this, is not permitted to be taught in their schools. In New York, we have something called Civics for All, and in some of the high schools, they've adopted a program where they give groups of 4 to 6 kids a semester to say, go find something in your neighborhood that you wish is better and figure out how to do that. 2 years ago, I was at the East Bronx Academy for the Future, and I was judging their sort of like presentation of what their projects were. And a lot of them had focused on illegal marijuana shops that were around the school, and they made maps of like, where are all of our illegal marijuana shops that we wish weren't close to our school? And in trying to remedy that problem, they would go to the police precincts and be like, can you enforce this? And they'd say, no, that's not ours to enforce. The state law looks like this, so we can't do it. They'd go to the city councils. They'd say, can you fix this? And they'd say, no, it's the state. The state has to do it. And it took state law getting passed and then failing in a bunch of different ways before that thing happens. These students in that semester didn't fix their problem, but they did learn a lot about how these routes and paths look and which levers you have to pull on, where you hit a stop, where you hit a hurdle, and how you get to something else. Experiential civics is the way that anyone who's in education will tell you is the best way for them to learn it, because oftentimes in our schools, they learn theoretical or historical civics, where they think like, okay, there were some founders some number of years ago, but they don't see themselves as part of that. When I do work in middle schools, I start with asking them what they've heard about the founders, and I just let them set the table, tell me this. We do our session, and at the end, I encourage them to think about what kind of founders they are. Because the way as I see it is America is not found. It's constantly being found, and we are doing the finding, so we need to see ourselves as part of that exercise. But when we say it's all a historical or theoretical look, they don't get it. It's also true that teacher and test prep have kind of crowded out the curriculum. So if you think about the final piece of high school being that SAT or that ACT score, neither one of these has a civics or social studies component. The ACT did until 1987, and then in order to look more like the SAT, it got rid of its social studies piece. Now, in some of the reading comprehension bits of the SAT, there will be foundational documents, but you're not tested on do you know the content of this, or do you kind of sort of understand the themes. It's can you do the reading comprehension, as it could have been any passage. However, when we know that there's sort of constraints in the classroom, you only have so many minutes, something that we hear is if it's not tested, it's not taught, which is you have to really think about what your incentives are. And for not only students, but for teachers themselves and for schools, they want higher scores on these assessments. So they have to focus their time and their efforts in those ways. There's also a set of court cases and administrative decisions that have changed. And when I was writing this book, one of my research assistants, Jenna Booth, who's at law school right now, she said, I'm really interested in figuring all those things out. And so she put together a really neat chapter where it was, here's the pathways in the federal and the state court systems that have made teachers a little bit weary about doing this. It's also true that if you just look at the money, I'm sure some of you have heard this quote before, which is for every $50 we spend on STEM, we spend 5 cents on civics. And so sort of no matter how you're trying to value this, you can see that there's an imbalance. However, since the book has come out, there has been some differences. Prior to our largest shutdown that we had this last year, the last thing the Department of Education did was issue $153 million new on civics. So say what you will about the current Department of Education and the current administration. In all the time that I've been doing this work, the federal level has issued between 0 and 6 grants a year for civic education, but in this last year, they issued 85. And so I do think there's going to be a bit of a change. Some people have been unhappy with how they think these programs are going to be unrolled, but I'm sort of the mind that more money and more attention to this can only be a benefit. So I'm heartened and excited to see how this sorts of rolls out in the next few years. And then finally, one of the reasons it's really hard to get this done in schools, and I know saying this with at least a parent that I know, and I'm sure many of you are also parents or grandparents, is that one of the reasons it's really hard to get it done in schools is parents themselves. Parents have made the role of teaching these things a little bit more touchy. Something that we heard in talking and interviewing many of the teachers were that we want to talk about these things, but we're afraid if we say something like, there's 3 branches of government and Congress is the first branch because it's Article 1 of the Constitution, a child can take that thing home, talk to the parents, and the parents could hear, that teacher must hate the president. If they said the Congress is over the president, they dislike them. And then they can inflame a Facebook group, or they can email a principal, or they can barrage the teacher themselves. And so they are hesitant to get into these topics, not because they don't want to, but because they're afraid of the blowback. After the book was out, and this is something that happens not only in red states, but also in blue states. We have private schools who have come under litigation from parents who are afraid or are unhappy about politics being talked at in the classroom. After the book came out, civics, which is the sort of largest educational partner in terms of how civics production materials are given to teachers, which is run by the Sandra Day O'Connor Institute, ran a survey of teachers to ask them, have you ever self-censored or restrained yourself from talking about a subject about government, politics, civics, and why? And what you're seeing here is over 76% of them said that they do self-censor due to fear of parent pushback. And it doesn't take a whole lot of parents. It takes one parent to make your life a really bad time on this subject. And so we know that there's this quelling thing that's happening in schools. There's also the question that asks them, like, so what is it that's keeping you from talking about these? Fear of controversy is at the top. But there's also lack of time in the curriculum, lack of administrative support, or they don't feel safe doing these things. Something else that we heard when we were talking to teachers is people would say this little joke, which was, I know who teaches AP US government. His name is Coach. And that's because in many high schools, a social studies curriculum is not full-time employment. So you're also the coach of the swim team, the coach of the football team, the coach of the wrestling team. Mine was a football coach. When Governor Tim Walz was nominated, it was that same sort of set where it was like, this is a social studies teacher and a coach. And so we know that they're not as supported as teachers who are in reading, writing, math, or science. So I make the argument that parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles should be agents of change. Sometimes when I give this talk to League of Women Voters, they'll say like, well, I'm not a parent, I'm a grandparent, so I should have got your book a long time ago. And I'll say, actually, I think you're a double parent now. Being a grandparent doesn't mean you're not a parent. It means you're a parent 2 times over. It also sort of means that I think that when I become a grandparent, I hope I can take on this extra responsibility, which is the parenting age is very stressful. They, take their kids to everything and feed them all the time and deal with all the things. As a grandparent, we have a little bit more relaxed opportunities to have this sort of engagement, to have these conversations, and not have to do day-to-day discipline or making sure you're going to t-ball or whatever your violin is tuned. And so I really see it as something that not only parents can take on, but people who have the ability as a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or a t-ball coach or a Girl Scout leader can do this sort of work. I know that our children we shape the way our children dream, and they model us, not only for what we do, but for what we don't do. So if they never see us voting, it's going to be mysterious when they have to go to a senior center or some sort of school that they've never been to in order to do this. Or if they never see us caring about a topic, engaging, calling our elected officials, going to protest, writing to others, doing the work of op-eds, then they're not going to have that model for themselves. I also know, and I'm sure you do as well, that children are very capable of doing politics. At a very young age, they're really good at like petty legalese, like this is mine, not yours, don't touch me, that line. When they get a little bit older, if you see them online in games like Roblox or Minecraft, they can do collective decision making, they can do resource allocation. And when we ask high schoolers, what is it that's keeping you out of politics? It's not apathy, it's that they don't know where to get started. It's that they don't like to do something where they're gonna feel foolish or out of their depth. And so we owe it to them to sort of shore up their skills, not only on knowledge, but know-how, so that they can figure out how to do this because they are curious and very capable. I also know that if it's a board game, a card game, or politics, no one likes playing a game they don't know the rules to. It doesn't work as nicely, it's not as fun, you're less likely to win. So if we can teach them the rules, they're gonna be more likely to engage in it because it's gonna feel fair. I also think that everything can only get better with more attention. I am not nervous about us over talking about this. I sort of see one of the beautiful things about being American is that we get to change the outcome of our future by the agency of being in a democratic republic. If we're focused on this and say like, wow, isn't it great that we can do this? Then that's a hopeful message, that's an optimistic message. Whereas a lot of our students are getting this notion that like everything's bad, it's always gonna get worse, the planet is burning and elections don't matter. That's not a way for us to live. If we have to be here for the rest of our lives, we might as well make it as good as we can, and more attention makes that better. I also know that every parent, grandparent wants their kids to be as powerful as possible. And you can't be as powerful as possible if you don't know all the routes to power and how to hold people in power accountable. I also know we want our students and our children to be healthy. And what I mean by this is mentally healthy. When I think about the stuff that plagues my college students, it's things like depression, loneliness, anxiety about the future. And when I think about what can sort of buttress that is repeated, purposeful interaction on local politics, whether that is mutual aid, whether that is city council stuff, whether that is student government stuff, but something that gets our kids thinking about themselves as part of a community instead of just one little single node in this big world where they're going to be lonely and anonymous from everyone else. I also know that if you do things in that K through 12 age in politics, you're more likely to set your kids up to get admitted into colleges. This is true whether they're doing local politics, state politics, federal politics. College admissions officers really like that because it shows that they're pro-social, give back to their community, problem solvers. And sometimes parents are like, I'm afraid if they do this for the wrong candidate, the admissions office isn't going to let them in. In my experience, that's never how admissions offices look at it. They care that you're trying, not who you're actually trying for. And I also know that we benefit. If you've ever talked with a child about a subject that you feel like you know a lot, you will learn in talking to them about where those shadows are, where the nuances is, how those corners feel to them. And they don't come at political topics with this prejudicial or here's how this party sees it. They come at it with a really nice, exploratory, curious approach that we would do better to emulate. So before I close, I'll say a little bit on partisanship, which is partisanship is inevitable in our national politics. In a system like ours, where we have single-member districts where one person is going to win, we are going to have a two-party system, and that's going to be something that's not necessarily all bad. It does some shortcutting for us when we're trying to think about who we're going to support or not, but it is inevitable. However, like I said earlier, raising a partisan is different than raising a citizen. And what I mean by this, I think, is easily said through a sports analogy. Let's say you were trying to raise an athlete versus a spectator. If you were trying to raise a really good soccer player, you would teach them the rules of the game. You would do little drills with them. You would have them condition off the field. You would do practice scrimmages. And then you would make them a very good athlete capable of being drafted by any team to play that sport. If you were just trying to make a fan, you'd say, here's the colors we paint our face. We boo when this person comes on. Here's our chants. Here's our cheers. But they wouldn't be better at playing the game. They would only be good at being on the sidelines. In politics, we're really all athletes. None of us are spectators, even if we think we're on the sidelines. We're really just less capable athletes, and we might not know whose team we happen to be drafted onto. And so I think we should think about raising our kids as athletes, as citizens, and letting them figure out which teams they want to play for later on. If we can just give them the tools and let them develop their own agency to sort of figure things out, we trust that we're making them as strong and as capable and as healthy as possible. And if you look at the best social science research on this today, it's about a coin toss that you can get what you want, which means if you're trying to raise a little Republican or you're trying to raise a little Democrat, it's about a 50-50 chance that you get that outcome, or you get someone who rebels and says, I'll pick this other team, or I'm so annoyed that you tried so hard, I'm opting out of this altogether. So it shouldn't be the goal. We also know that politics change. Personalities of politics change. Ideology is fluid. The parties that we grew up with might not be the parties that they're growing up with. And so let them develop this and then feel whatever team that's going to work best for them. And if your child sees things differently than you, that's not a failure. In some ways, it's a marker of success that you have a house that has enough wide love for a bunch of different perspectives. So that's very much okay, and I don't think it should be the goal. So in order to do this work, I know that you all are already doing this because you're in the League of Women Voters. But parents will often ask me, they'll be like, what's the one thing I can do? And I always have to say, you have to be willing and see it as your task to do. Because a lot of times we think someone else will teach them. They'll learn this in school. They'll get taken care of somewhere else. But we are the ones who show them what this life looks like, and they are best learning from us versus anything that they can learn in a classroom. What you're willing to do, I don't know. Maybe you care about bike lanes. Maybe you care about pollution. Maybe you care about roads. But you have to find something that you care about so they can see that active. I also think it's important that you show them, bring them along what it is to care about these processes. So when you vote, they can't vote, but they should see what that looks like. When you go to your Capitol building, they should see what that looks like. When you talk to a person who's in Congress or city council or state government, they should hear that and be a part of it. When I was writing this book, I was on a trip with my niece, and her name's Piper, and she lives in Olathe, Kansas. And she was like, Aunt Lindsey, I don't know who my mayor is. And I was like, oh, Piper, I don't either, but I'm sure we can find out. We sat down with my laptop, we found out who her mayor was, and we sent him an email together and said, hi, my niece is a constituent of yours. I'm going to be in town in September. Could we arrange a meeting so she could see what you do? His office got back to us, and you would have thought she was meeting the president. She was so excited to go meet this very important person, and she walked away being like, he kind of looks like Uncle Brett. Like, it was just like a person. It was like, this is a neighbor. It could be my uncle. It could be someone else. And it wasn't scary, nameless, faceless bureaucrat or like a prince on high. It was a part-time mayor of Olathe who's doing his best. And she's seeing that that's just something that she can aspire to. And he asked her, he's like, what would you like in Olathe? And she was like, I would like more horses. And he was like, I know, a lot of kids like this. But he was like, oh, unbeknownst to you, we just portioned off this part of land where we do have some horses that we just put out there. And so they were able to see that connection in real time. And so that's what I asked for. And the final thing is that I think we need to check our negativity. And this is not to say that there's not things to complain about. It's not to say that there's not fair criticisms to be leveled. But if our kids only hear us saying everything that's wrong in politics, they can't appreciate what's right. So if you have newly paved roads, you can point out, government did that, that's great. Or if you have a nice new park or a senior center or a place to recreate, let our kids know that that was our work in action, our government in action, our individual politics in action, so that they can see that as something they can aspire to. I think that generosity is best given as attention, especially when we have a lot of other things that are pulling on our attentions. So thank you for being so generous with me with your attention. I will answer any questions that you have. Yes.
Could I just share a little joke with you?
Do it.
This comic comes from decades ago. I'm almost embarrassed to say how long. And it was one of those Sunday comics when I still had the paper out. And the family is there raising this little kid. And they've got several older children, but then they have this little baby who's sitting on the floor. And mom and dad are arguing back and forth whether the baby's first word will be mommy or daddy. And there's some contention in the last image. There's the little baby and spouts out, gubernatorial!
Oh, wow. I would love to see that. Yeah. It's so unlikely. Yes.
I want to thank you for, this is great information, especially for those of us who work with young people. And actually, Greg is on the lead. He's the chair of the voter ed committee. And we are concerned about high school students who are going out of state school. And so we're coming up with new material, actually, palm cards to give them, to help them negotiate what it is they have to do. And we're doing this now, and not waiting until November, because if they're out of state, they have to have connections with their parents to help them with this process. And then we also have issues with college students who are going to school here, but live out of state. And unfortunately, in Missouri now, they've passed laws where you cannot use your student ID. You have to have a Missouri driver's license. And most of these students, understandably, do not want to change their driver's license to Missouri. So we have a big job of helping them negotiate getting an absentee ballot. So I really appreciate you bringing this up, because I think our college students and our high school students and all these young people are being targeted because we have an administration who doesn't want them to vote. And so I think this is important for us to really pay attention to this. And also, I just went to a seminar where, interestingly enough, this group that does some research on 18 to 24-year-olds, that they asked them, who do you trust the most? And the good news is that social media was at the bottom. So they understand that what they're getting from social media is not trustworthy. And then on the top with their peers and organizations like us.
So the Zoom has asked me to repeat what you said because they can't hear it. But what she was talking about is how it's hard in Missouri to get young people who are college students registered to vote in Missouri because student IDs don't count as an ID. It would have to be a Missouri driver's license or like probably a military ID, or I'm sure there's a few others that are fine in Missouri. But the awareness that it's like hard to negotiate what it is to do an absentee ballot successfully, because it's not wait until the day of the election to figure it out. And that's something that I find at the university level. I do our voter registration and our voter drive stuff, and we do something called ducks to the polls because our mascot is a duck. And we take all our little ducks to the polls, we drop them off, and then we have an ice cream party. But without fail, numbers of them are turned away because they're either not registered or they're not registered in that county. And they didn't know there was this shadow game that happened 30 days ago to sort of update these things or send away for ballots. And I also think we're going to have some challenges this time around in terms of what day of a postmark is going to be considered a valid ballot, because it's sort of still in flux at the USPS on whether it's going to be the day that it's mailed or the day that it's received. And then are you going to get a postmark if it's in a box instead of handed to a person? And so there's a lot of stuff where we have to start thinking about this now instead of waiting until October, because by then a lot of that game's already too late. Yeah.
As a former postal worker,
the answer to that is to bring it physically into the post office to a clerk and have them stamp it.
Right in front of you.
Yeah.
So what Joyce was saying is that as a postal worker, she knows that you should just bring it in person to a postal worker and have them stamp it right in front of you. Yes?
So, I love that part in your presentation where you talked about athletes versus fans, okay?
Thanks, I like that too. I came up with that after the book came out and I was like, all right, I really like this one. It works, yeah.
Okay, so I'll tell you why, and I do have a question, okay? So you talked about the need for the athlete to have rules, and you talked about the need to get better at playing. And there's this, and this is actually true for music also, okay? If you're a performer, you have to practice. If you're a spectator, you just listen, okay? So there's this whole idea of if the musician gets better by practicing, if the athlete gets better by practicing, if the citizen gets better by practicing. So what are the things that you do to practice as a citizen?
Okay, so this is a great question. It was saying, like athletes, musicians, artists, a lot of other people get better by practicing. And what is it that we can do to practice? I will tell you, I sort of take an all of the above approach. So like if you've never testified at a city council hearing, I think you should go see what that's like or offer testimony if you have it. I think joining my community board has been one of the most educational experiences about how sort of civics works in action in local politics. I think it is making sure that you're engaging not only with things that are appealing to you, but also really trying to hear things that are not appealing to you, which is very hard in the sense that for most of us, the way that we get our media is not let me pick the channel. It's on something that algorithmically says, here's what is going to keep this person engaged. And so sometimes that means going to find something else. For me, how that looks is with DC Inbox, this database that I run, I read e-newsletters from Democrats, from Republicans, from Freedom Caucus members, from squad members to sort of see like what is this argument shape without this notion of like this one is right. It's like, okay, there's a lot of viewpoints on it. And so I sort of think it's putting yourself in any of these civic moments that you can. If you have parents, they should try for PTA stuff or at least go see what that work is like. If you have people who are working by lakes, maybe you're volunteering to do lake cleanup. I think there's so many different civic ways for us to get involved, and I wouldn't say that any one of them is bad, but some of them aren't going to suit you, and that's fine to figure out. Like I do volunteer snow shoveling. That suits me. It wouldn't suit a lot of people. But I think if you opt into stuff and figure out what your route is, you're going to find something that fits. And I heard that you're teaching stuff in classrooms.
Yes.
Yeah, League of Women Voters, we have this in my college classroom, as I brought a league member in to do it. And I think all of these activities are something where, for teachers, it sort of gives us this sort of lift that we might not have to do that sort of discussion with our students that we have to see for 16 weeks, but someone else, a trusted, outside, neutral voice can do that work. So I think that's really good volunteer work that the league does.
So let me follow up on that,
Yes.
because this is worth sharing. When we were in the high school, let me describe the high school and the students.
Brandon, why don't you go and use the
I was just
microphone?
gonna say that.
Tell them, because the Zoom people want to hear you.
Okay, let me describe the high school. This is Northeast High School. The students were 16 to 18 years old. It is the number 2 immigrant population high school. And there was this one exercise that I think Kelly, if you're on the call, you get a gold star for this. She found this rubric, and it was about what matters in your community, okay? And they listed about 7 things, okay? And we didn't know it going into this, but we found out coming out of it. And that is this message that if you are 17, or if you are 17 and a half, you are not old enough to vote. But you are old enough to know what matters to you. You are old enough to begin to identify what are the 3 most important things to you. And so the exercise that we gave to these students in the class was, here's this circle of 9 things. There isn't a right or wrong answer. Well, what are the 3 things that are most important to you? And it got an amazing amount of engagement. I've been in front of students and I've gotten the kind of like, I'm a zombie, I'm tuning out, I'm thinking about something else, and I'm not going to answer any question. these kids were engaged with that question. It was a great practice, great way of practicing democracy.
Good, I'm glad you did that, thank you. The league does a lot of stuff like this, and it like heartens me to know that we have so many people around the country who care about like doing all these little pieces, because I do think we're in sort of an all hands on deck moment where like all the little pieces matter and you never know whose sort of civic role model you're going to be or what sort of spark you have. And when I was doing that thing, talking to people in New York City, the biggest thing that I heard was people were like, I don't like the way that our government is going, or I don't like the way politics functions. And they were describing themselves as like they were passengers on this like ship of politics or ship of democracy. And I sort of came away with it being like, I'm sorry, everyone, we're not passengers, but if we want to stop being seasick, we got to be the crew. Like that's what we really are, instead of thinking we're going for a ride. Yes, yes.
Oh, no, I think I projected in University of Classroom, no.
I'll tell him. I'll tell him.
Loud enough to be heard over the Zoom. Use the microphone.
Oh, never mind. Excuse me, I developed some strange. Okay.
That's great.
This isn't a huge question, but all of my experience actually has been with older students, with college students who are adults. I mean, but I have a lot of friends who are high school teachers, and I wondered if you would ever present this in front of high school students or teachers.
Yeah.
Because this, they will identify with everything you say, and it'll be great for them to understand that there's people observing them and listening to them and caring about them. Because I've run a couple of, well, not I personally, but I've been part of some NEH grants for college professors and college people, and they feel the same kind of loneliness and anxiety, and like nobody cares about them. And I just think this would be a great booster for them. And when you were making that comment about the coaches teaching, because they can move the players like football teams, they would all burst out. I did. I burst out laughing because I heard that so many times. So I really hope that you will, that this can be part of, I don't know, a part of their curriculum, or at least part of their lives, that they know that you're doing this research and it's really quite meaningful and people like it.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't mean to take up a lot.
You didn't take, no, that was perfect. And it was a really generous thing to say. I do like doing this work in high schools, in middle schools, and elementary schools. And how it's mostly happened to me so far is word of mouth, is like I do it in one school and then a teacher says, oh, to their friend who's another school. And how it's usually been packaged is the morning is me talking with the parents, and it'll be PTA or some level of the parents where I'll come in and I'll say, like, here's what I'm gonna talk about with your kids today. Here's sort of why we need someone who's outside of the classroom to do it, because it's really hard for our teachers to get it done. And then I'll do some exercises with the teachers because there's a lot of different things that are challenging. When we talk about young people, something that I repeatedly hear from young girls is they're very annoyed or tired or over hearing about the founders because they're all men and they're all white. And so I have this really fun lecture where I talk about how Dolly Madison is as much a founder as James Madison is, in the way that the norms of the Republic get shaped under her sort of guidance. And I start to encourage them to think about women's power, not just as like voting, because then they got to wait a long time before that kicks in. But there's so many other forms of power that exist. And so I'll do some sort of teacher training on some sort of topic that hopefully helps them in the classroom. And then I do with the kids. And this Wednesday, I was in a New York City public school with like 200 seventh graders. And it's a very different presentation than what you all saw. We start with a push-up contest. And they think I'm like, an old lady who's not going to beat them. But if they've only been alive for 12 years, I can beat them in a push-up contest. And then we're done, we say push-ups are a lot like politics. The more you practice, the better at it you get. And then we're like throwing out candy as they're getting the right answers. So I really do like the classroom setting, but I think it's good to layer it so that when they come home, they can say, this crazy lady jumped around our stage. And the parents will be like, yeah, she told me you have to learn these things. And it's a really good time. So if you have any routes or advice on how to do that, I would love to. And I always like being here because my 3 nieces are here and my cousins are here and their children are here. My uncles and aunts are here. My parents are sometimes here. So yeah, I would love to. I think Victor.
I know you said to check the negativity, but you really try to put a positive spin on the fact that the administration did spend money on civics. However, what's your opinion on that? There's no way that money doesn't come with caveats, quid pro quo on their side.
Yeah, so I actually got into a bit of a tiff with my high school social studies teacher on this very same point, where I was like, I'm going to applaud this administration when it does something good, and I'm going to call it out when I think there's something that they need to be held accountable for. For me, how I see this movement is we've had a Democratic administration for 4 years who could have released a lot of DOE money to do civics education, and they didn't, and that was a choice. And it wasn't that Democrats in Congress weren't pushing for that. It's not that people in the Department of Education weren't pushing for that. It's that there was sort of this restraint of power, or seeing as it's not as like necessary. And so for me, I think the way that these grants have been allocated, 85% of them or so have gone to university partners to set up like civic centers or like teach the foundational documents. And some of that is going to come with what we might consider like a conservative read on things, which is like an originalist text interpretation, or here's how we're doing this. As I see it though, you can engage with the foundational documents as much as you want. You're not going to come away in a way that makes you believe that state power should be as powerful as some people who are in this current administration think it should be. So I'm sort of the persuasion that more studying on this is good, even if some of it comes in a box that might not like fit with my own sort of pedagogical or personal politics approach. I think it's we net benefit by having more money on this subject than not. So that's where I sit on it. Yes?
When you work with parents in these presentations, what is their response?
Generally positive. I've only ever had one bad interaction. I've had hundreds of great interactions. Sometimes parents will say, moms more than dads will say like, I just don't know enough about this, and so I don't want to lead them astray, or I don't want to tell them the wrong thing. And I think that's a really inhibiting feeling, because I'm like, look, if you're here and you're eligible to be a part of this country, then you have the capacity to learn about these things. And I was like, you've navigated a healthcare system, like you can figure out hard stuff. None of this is rocket science. And I encourage them to do it with their kids. So even for me, like when I get a ballot, New York City sends us a ballot before our elections. There's always questions that I don't know anything about. It's like, we're going to change the city charter, so here's a paragraph to figure it out. I don't feel like we need to have government trivia experts. Our kids don't need us to be experts on everything. They need us to show them what it is to learn more. So it's like, oh, I'll go figure this out. You go figure this out. We'll reconvene and we'll do it together. The only ever bad time I had was I was giving this talk to a lawyers trade association group. And they came away with it saying, like the short, non-generous version was like, parents are too stupid to get this work done. I don't know why you're thinking it will work. And my sort of take on that was like, well, we don't really have a lot of other options. Like if it's hard to get it done in the schools and we have to be with them and we all have to be here for the rest of our lives. So I think we should try as best as we can and try to like shore up parents' capacity to do it instead of saying they can't take it on. Yes?
Have you ever presented to like a teachers industry group or a teachers union?
Teachers unions, no. I have done this work for the International City Managers Association. They had me keynote their last annual convention. And then last month I was at the leadership program for the Rockies, which is like their nonprofit leadership sort of like program. They run 600 people through it every year. Teachers, not yet. I do individual PTAs, individual schools, but not a bigger teacher union org. I think they would like it. I think it would square away with most of their experiences.
It feels like just talking about people recognizing their powers as citizens, it's like energizing the teachers are in fact collectively quite powerful.
Oh yes.
If they are together and moving towards the same goal.
Oh yes. And I think our politics will function and feel better if we have more people on board with learning more, instead of seeing this as like a drag or something that dweebs and nerds only learn or something that only people in DC care about. It's really something that we can all care about and all do. And I have found at the local level, we can be really pivotal. So like at my university, only about a quarter of them turned out to vote last mayor's election around. And you might be like sad about that, but that was 1,250 people or so. And the mayor's election was determined by 960 people. So I was like, you all are pivotal. Well, whether you like feel it individually or not, as a collection, even with your low turnout ratio overall, you can change things. And so I think part of it is seeing that. And I also think for young people, in Missouri, one of the questions they said is they were like, people don't know that the Declaration was written 250 years ago. Is that a problem? And I was like, I don't really know if like we need to like quiz them on like what's the date, if that's like critical, pivotal knowledge. However, Something that I like knowing about thinking that the Declaration is only 250 years old is I'm 16% of this American experience in my age. President Trump is about a third of the American experience in his age. And so when we sort of like think about our bodies, our lives as time in this sort of experiment, I like that. I sort of got away from your question. But yes, I think there's a lot to do with teachers. And I think if we can situate kids seeing themselves as a part of it, all the better. Thank you all so much. Wow. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hooray.
Thank you so much. I'll just, yeah, thank you so much, Lindsay. It was gave us so much to think about and was so informative and very exciting. Thank you. I think, does anyone else have any other announcements or anything else to say?
I just had a question. You didn't bring books here.
The library doesn't want me to sell books, which is true in every library because that's not what their model is. But I will tell you, it is, I don't know how he does it, but Jeff Bezos sells it for like $13. I can't even buy it from my publisher for $13. If you go to howtoraiseacitizen.com, I'll sign a copy and send it to you for $22. But it doesn't matter to me, any way you get it, same on mine.
The question is about getting the book, getting Lindsay's book, and if you go to
howtoraiseacitizen.com, the very first pop-up will say, like, do you want a signed copy? And I'll sign it and send it from my house. There's signed copies at every Barnes & Noble in like Leawood, Oak Park.
How about the libraries?
And send it to you.
We would have to request that they do
And
that.
sign copy.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Or
It feels weird when I do it.
It's already.
Or donate one.
Oh,
Sure, or that, or
Yeah.
ask them. Yeah.
All right, great question. Thank you. Anyone else? Anything else? And
I have a very,
Cindy.
it's kind of an odd thing.
Oh, Cindy, you want to come up here and show
Okay.
that to
Yes, I
our
will.
our viewers at
All
home?
right. Is Rita still on Zoom? Is Rita still on?
Let's see. Is this the Zoom?
Okay.
Rita.
Okay.
We have lots of, by the way, lots
Okay.
of nice comments.
So,
and
Rita
things.
Golden the other night brought this to me and said, this was in her car after Peace, Love, Vote fundraiser. Does it belong to anyone here or on Zoom? It's with me now, so just get in touch with me and let me know it's yours. Otherwise, I'll donate it to somebody.
It's an apron with hummingbirds on it. We're looking for the owner, the previous owner, or maybe a new
Someone
owner.
who was most likely a volunteer at that event and needed an apron.
I'm sorry, which event was
The
it?
Peace, Love, Vote,
Oh, Peace, Love,
September.
Vote, last September.
Yes.
So if you're missing a hummingbird apron, please let us know. And if you would like a hummingbird apron, also please let us know.
Or I could bring it to our next fundraiser event, which will be September 16th, later this year. Thank
Your
you.
raffle prize. Yes, Riva.
Oh, not my phone. Dang it, okay. The Central Library has one copy.
Oh, great.
Oh,
And it's available, so if you want it, you can go on right now and put it on
okay.
hold.
Central Library in Kansas City has a copy of Lindsay's book.
They might, and then there's also one at the Johnson County Library and the Mid-Continent Public Library.
And there are more around in other libraries as well. So check out the library and also buy a book. Yes, Pat.
New topic.
New topic.
I brought some book 411 flyers, the full-page flyers that you could grab to post in coffee shops and places that you can frequent in your community. We've also got the quarter-page flyers and the business cards. I know Kelly said that she was interested in, if you're doing voter registration, you might want to grab some business cards. And I have no business cards.
That is talking about different handouts that are available in person. So next time you are in person, you can grab some business cards, flyers, postcards. All right. Thank you. Let's see if there are any other questions. Have you been any other questions from? Let's see. Please attend the Mix and Mingle events from Laura. Anything else on Zoom? Lots and lots of gratitude and thanks.
Thank you. Turn your machine.
Okay, so, yeah, okay, I think that is an interest in buying books. All right, thanks, everyone. That's in the